Right, let's get started. So welcome everybody to the TM Hub and to our discussion tonight, and welcome to everybody as well that's joining us and watching live on our networking feed as well. Welcome, welcome. So tonight we are discussing overwork and underpaid, TV burnout, and how we use the Time Project to tackle it. So we are really happy to have you all joining us. We're joined tonight by two members of the Share My Telly Job team, Michelle James Reynolds and Dr. Rowan Ost. But SMTJ is very much a group effort, and missing, although watching us, we know, are Lou Patel, founder of SMTJ, and co-director Natalie Grant. The SMTJ team have been hosting all week on the TM Hub, but in case you aren't familiar with who they are, their mission is to advocate job sharing to help all freelancers achieve a better work-life balance and continue to thrive in an industry they have dedicated their working lives to. They are committed to educating broadcasters and production companies about the merits of flexible work and the exceptional wealth of talent it brings to their programming. And they challenge the negative perceptions surrounding part-time work in the TV industry. Great work, girls. Michelle is SMTJ's full-time operations manager and co-director, and she joined SMTJ following a 17-year career as a producer and director in factual and entertainment television in the UK and the US. Her career highlights included House Hunters International for Leopard USA, 100-Year-Old Driving School for RDF, and Deal or No Deal for Endemol. Love that show. Michelle then went on to work as the high-end TV manager for Screen Skills, where she became involved with the world of TV drama and ran a number of successful training programmes, including a return to work scheme with Film London. Michelle now works solely for Share My Telly Job and is passionate about promoting job sharing as the best way of keeping talented, experienced and diverse freelancers in the industry. Rowan is SMTJ's academic consultant and co-director. Rowan is a television studies researcher, lecturer in film and TV, and an ex-TV person. Rowan started in TV in Sydney as a location assistant for Australia's Ground Force way back in the early noughties. She landed at BBC Arts a few years later and worked on arts docs and news at the Beeb and Indies until she had her first child in 2011. After that, the maternal wall loomed and she left TV for a PhD in 2014. She got to know Share My Telly Job through her research into care practices in television production, joining them in 2020 as part of the Time Project collaboration, and now works with them as their academic consultant as well as teaching at the University of Huddersfield. So welcome to our SMTJ team. Also joining us tonight is Arun Devazia, organising official at Bectu, and he has close to 10 years experience in political, community and workplace organising spanning Australia and the UK. He first started as a rep for the CPSU in Australia, advocating for his colleagues in the Federal Public Services. In the UK, he organised communities in the West Midlands and Black Country against the active far right for Hope Not Hate, bringing people together to build community resilience and reject extreme right opportunists. Most recently, he was with Bectu's sister union in Australia, the MEAA, organising journalists and newsroom workers in a very disrupted and fast-paced industry. His strengths are in bringing people together and to achieve tangible, positive outcomes and in building workplace power from scratch. And finally, we're very pleased to welcome Andy Harrower, who is Chief Executive at Directors UK and has been championing the rights of creators for over 30 years. He joined Directors UK in May 2020 after a long career at PRS for Music, where he was Director of Licensing. Andy has led negotiations with all the major UK broadcasters and SVOD companies and continues to do this at Directors UK. He is proud to be representing TV and film directors and working to create a world in which their talent and creativity is recognised and properly valued. So that's all of our lovely panellists tonight. So I suppose we need to kick off really. And I think, Michelle, I'm going to come to you for our first question, which is, in a nutshell, tell us a little bit about the Time Project.
Hi, thanks, Bex. So I suppose the Time Project came out of the work that we were doing, looking at making the industry more open to people who couldn't work the excessive hours that we were facing in TV. I mean, it's a widely known fact that we work ridiculous hours in telly, but we started to realise that it was impacting on every single problem that we could see in TV. We noticed that the lack of time in our industry was impacting on a number of things, and we thought that actually what we needed was some way of recording hours worked. So the recording of hours on the Time Project was really crucial because it feeds into recruitment, the problems we have with recruitment. Last minute commissions lead to not enough time to advertise or interview. So jobs are won informally. It runs into scheduling. I think even more so at the moment, schedules are so quick. Swift starts and unrealistic undeliverables. The only way you can make the show is by people pulling ridiculously long hours. There's not enough. These buyout contracts have been seen more and more, so people are not in control of the time that they're working. We all love our jobs in telly, and I think when you look at it on the face of it, we earn a good amount of money. Oh, sorry, my dog found a squeaky toy. This is excellent. Hang on a minute, I'm going to rescue it up in here. What's that? Right, hang on a minute. Yes, so we all earn what is meant to be a good wage, but when you look at the hours worked versus the money we're getting, actually, is your hourly rate that good? Management, when it comes to management, there's no time to manage your staff. There's no time to train your managers, which can lead to things like bullying, which we've seen a lot of in our industry. Budgets, we're having to pay to fix problems caused by unrealistic time planning. Excessive amount of time, of work time, excludes a lot of people. It excludes new entrants from lower socioeconomic backgrounds because they're unable to get a second job to kind of tide them over those gaps between freelance contracts. They're unable to afford accommodation close to their workplace, so they can't do that commute at 2 o'clock in the morning when they wrap. There's no time for training. And sort of what we were really interested in seeing is how excessive working hours affected the diversity of our workforce, the mental health of our workforce. Coming off the back of the Looking Glass report from the Film and TV charity, we could see that there was a mental health crisis in our industry, and they themselves pointed to the fact that there were people working these excessive hours and burning out as being the problem. So the Time Project, I suppose, if we're going to what it actually is it's a web-based app. It's a tool that allows people to record their hours worked and their rates, but also it allows us to have a look, because they'll also record their personal information. It's all anonymous, but we'll be able to pull out that data and see who is bearing the burden of that overwork. We'll be able to see by gender, ethnicity, disability, socioeconomic status, really a region, as well as genre and role. It's all very exciting, that we'll be able to see where those pressure points are in the industry and why and who are pulling these excessive working hours. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, but I hope that made sense.
It was amazing. But I was just thinking as you were saying that, like the fact that it's such a long answer to that question just shows you that time is intrinsic to so many problems that we are facing within the within the TV industry.
I think it's a real root cause for a lot of the issues that are happening in our industry, and that obviously that's what we think, but now the Time Project is actually going to allow us to get the actual evidence to show where the problems are and to put forward a case for change.
Yeah, great. And Rowan, this one to you really. Where did the idea come from and how did it all evolve?
Well, I think the idea came, as Michelle said, through conversations that we had. When I first met SMTJ sort of just over a year ago in the course of my research into kind of motherhood and exclusionary practices in television. So we were talking a lot about the way mothers are treated and the way women who don't have children are treated, and the ways in which they're kind of squeezed out in this apparently kind of progressive changes in TV practice. And we started to kind of try to explore the ways in which, television tries to be progressive and what the kind of actual effects are. And of course, it's a very atomized culture. So, you know, where there's good happens in one place, it often has an impact that isn't so good in another place. And then, you know, as Michelle said, we eventually alighted on the fact that it is time that underpins all of this. If people are given time to kind of understand what they really need, and you know, they can reach a kind of better point of what they need to ask for. It also applies to management practice, you know, so in the last few decades, management practice is focused really on efficiency rather than the need of the workers. So, you know, that human element has been squeezed out, and you see that kind of most obviously in scheduling. So production schedules have been really reduced in real terms, if you judge that by budget. So, you know, we got to thinking, well, let's measure what hours people are doing and when, you know, which parts of the industry are most affected, you know, and these things we know anecdotally. So, you know, mothers being impacted because they have to leave at 5 to get their kids. And, you know, whether or not, you know, all of the marginalized groups have different requirements that are not addressed because they are not given the time, as Michelle said. So that's where it came from. And we took it to Sign, and they were very excited. So.
And well, that brings me nicely onto my next question. Who are Sign and what are their involvement?
Sign it's an acronym for the Screen Industries Growth Network. They're based at the University of York, but it's a multi-institutional, Yorkshire and the Humber wide. I think it's 12 universities. I may be wrong. And it's a 3-year project, and it's an attempt to locate best practice. And bring it back to kind of really augment the work that's going on in Yorkshire across the screen industries, so not just in television. And I was working with them already on a different research project. And when we brought this to them, they could see that, you know, this work hasn't been done before. No one has ever looked at television from this perspective. It has, you know, other applications, potential applications across the screen industry. So it was immediately appealing to them, and they funded a pilot, which we ran in September, which I think Michelle has some stats for. And yeah, and then that was very successful, and we got a bit more money to build an app.
So this has been, you know, this has been a long time in the making for you guys. And I think when I'm listening to you talk, I just think myself about my own experience working in television, that actually, you know, these anecdotes about, you know, working hours, it sort of becomes part of what you think your job is. You know, I know that when I first started off in TV, part of it was that you would be prepared to work any hours that were given to you, or else you might not get your next contract, was the fear, you know. But that became the same, you know, the same deal as just getting the job in the first place. It was just expected, you know, that you were going to work those kind of hours. But like you said, there was no way of ever monitoring it, or, you know, or even that if you spoke out about it and said, you know what, I'm quite knackered, I don't think I can do these hours, that you were actually penalised, or the perception was that you would be penalised for it. So
absolutely, there's a sort of survival of the fittest kind of attitude, isn't there, in telly? But I think what we're hoping with the app is that you kind of become empowered. You kind of are able to see how much you're working, how much you are working unpaid, you know, overtime that you're not getting paid for, because classically in telly you don't really get paid overtime. And even if you are, you know, even if you're an editor and you're getting paid overtime to work your 20-hour shift, you actually don't want to be working that. You know, that's fine that you're getting paid for it, but that's not healthy. So the cool thing about the app, I think, is that when you've inputted your hours, you can also compare to what other people in your genre, your department, and your role, what their hours are that they're working, and what their real hourly rate is. So you can kind of see where you are in that sort of spectrum, and hopefully be able to have a bit of oomph about you and say, actually, you know, I'm in the top 90% of hours worked for a director. You know, this can't go on, you know, and feel a little bit empowered that you can push back.
And I think the other thing it does that's really important to remember is it's a collective endeavor. So, you know, the more people use it, the more successful it is. And that, you know, our hope for it is that it becomes habitual to the TV workforce. And they do start discussing things like rates, you know, all of the stuff that is previously been taboo, you know, would be really useful to have that knowledge shared. And this is, you know, it's all anonymized. We actually haven't used that word, and it works on the basis for critical mass, so you can never identify anyone. But it is a way of gaining a new perspective on your work.
Yeah. And as she comes back into the picture.
Sorry, my dog Fat has like 100 squeaky toys in this kitchen. I've like keep trying to get rid of them. I'm so sorry, but they're all gone now. So I'm with you completely, 100%.
I was just going to ask you to tell us a bit more about the pilot, because I understand that, you know, obviously, as I said, this has been a long time in the making. So there was a pilot that you ran in September last year.
That's right.
Yeah, and just tell us a bit about the results of that.
Yeah, so the pilot, in some ways it was good because it kind of confirmed what we thought was the case, but obviously it also confirmed that there was a lot of people pulling a lot of hours. So the data that came back showed that on average, telly people were working 16 hours over the UK national working average per week. I think we were pulling something like 55, 56 hours per week. I think the highest number were in craft and tech roles, but directors also pulling big numbers. 62% of people were working longer than their contract stated. And we were looking at people, I think the longest hour a week we had was a 95-hour week, which included a 20-hour day. And but this was back in September, October. And since then, I think with the scrabble to create new content, you know, I think we went through 2 years worth of content in 6 months or something I heard last year. So in that scrabble to quick, we've got to make something to put on, you know, we're getting more and more people getting in touch with us saying, you know, I'm working all hours. And I think because a lot of people are working from home as well, you know, there's no division, there's no stop, I've got to get on a train and get home. So people are just working ridiculous hours. So the pilot was successful in that it proved that what we thought was happening, and it allowed us to then say, okay, we want to do this for real. But yes, rather dispiriting stats coming out of there, I have to say.
And I suppose then after that, your decision was to develop the app. Is that what came out of your pilot?
That's right. So we worked with a company called Outlandish there, and they made Bectu's website, and they are a cooperative web development company. So we love them because they're basically the whole reason they exist is to help social enterprises and to make the world a better place, which is what we want to do as well. And they're great. So we decided we would get down. We decided we would go and work with them to create it's a web-based app. So it's live now. So you can go on and it's www. I don't know, do people still say that? But it's thetimeproject.co.uk. And we've done one development sprint, where we kind of put in the must-haves of the app, so allowing people to track time, to create contracts, and to put in their personal information. And then we're starting a new sprint next week, Rowan. Exciting times, where we're adding more features, for example, the ability for people to track their emotional well-being. As I said, a big part of this was to see how hours worked affects the mental health of our workforce. So that's one of the big things that we're inputting in this second sprint, is so that people will be able to say, okay, today I've worked 17 hours, I've had no breaks, I'm feeling exhausted, I'm feeling unwell, I'm feeling stressed, or I worked 17 hours, I've loved it, you know, I'm feeling grateful, I'm thankful, I'm loving my job, this is a project that I'm really excited about, because, you know, we do love our jobs in telly and we love to work hard, but it's not sustainable to work crazy hours every day. So I don't know if this is the time. Is this the time, Bex, where I get to share my screen?
Yes, go ahead. Share your screen.
Now I'm really rubbish at this. Can I just say I'm really sorry if this goes absolutely wrong. Hang on a minute.
This is the moment where you have to make sure you've closed down all your tabs.
I know. Clear my browser history. No, I'm joking. Hang on a minute. Let me share. Okay. All right. I'm sharing my screen. Okay. Here we go. So here we are. This is our staging site, so that it means I can show you without affecting data that's coming on. So the actual website is thetimeproject.co.uk. But this is how it looks when you go on. It actually looks best when you use it on your phone. But you can register here. And as you can see here, when you register, you put your name, address, date of birth, so we can see what your age is, your gender, ethnicity, your region where you live, whether you have a disability, and then I'm just going to click over to here. So then when you've registered, you can then add a contract. So it'll come in here, add a new contract. And it can say, what do you want to call this contract? So I'm going to call it practice. You can see I've been practicing. And you can choose what your employment status is. So I'm going to say I'm a freelancer. What type of contract is it? Let's say it's a full-time contract. How many days? Let's go 5 days a week. And we'll go for a day rate, let's say. I think I put in, actually when I registered, I think I put that I was a gallery director. So let's say my contract rate, I don't know, Andy, should we say like 400 quid a day? Let's be big bucks. Let's put that in. Does your contract state how many hours you're expected to work a week or a day? Let's say, yes, we want to work 10 hours a day. And then you can put in when your contract starts. So let's say it starts on Monday, and let's say it finishes on, oh, hang on, I can't see. There we go. Oh, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to do this one. Sorry. It's good to learn, actually. And it finishes here, let's say. And you can put in what genre it is. It's really exciting for us to see whether different genres have different working patterns. So if a director in drama is working longer hours than a director in entertainment or whatever. But let's say I am in Fact Ent and it's going on the Beeb. There we go, add contract. So there you go. So that's our contract here. Now you'll also be able, I'm just going to move over here because my face is in the way. Move over, face. You'll also be able to go here, and it says here, go to your profile, and you'll be able to add more details about yourself. So you'll be able to add, when was your first paid job in TV industry? So you get an idea of experience here, childcare and caring responsibilities, nationality, socioeconomic background, gender identity, sexuality. All these things are really important when we kind of see, you know, is a black female director in Bristol getting paid more or less than a white male director in Manchester, for example, or working more hours? And suddenly you'll be able to see how that all works. So then the cool thing, sorry, I'm nearly done, but the cool thing here is if I come here, you can see your week in review. So obviously I haven't done anything yet, so I should probably have done it before. But anyway, here you'll be able to say, you've worked this many hours, you were paid for this many hours, 10 hours a day. So you've gifted a certain number of hours over that per week to your production. So your real hourly rate is this, for example. And then you'll also be able to see how you compare. So here we go. So actually it's just the directors, but here you'll be able to see the average of hours that directors have worked per day, and then how you compare to them. There's other, so that's kind of how it gives you an idea. I mean, this is kind of, you know.
How does that work in relation? So is this something that production companies can use at this stage, or is, you know, to see how they are performing?
Yeah, so not yet, but that's exactly what we want to do in future iterations. So what we would love is to, what we're going to do is going to get a dashboard, I suppose. So we have a dashboard. So you have your own personal dashboard where you can monitor your contracts and your hours. And and then we're going to create sort of personalized dashboards for production companies where they can see the anonymized data of their workforce. So they can see the hours worked by their workforce, which job roles. There has to be a minimum of 15 people in a group, in a particular group that you're choosing that data from to maintain an anonymity, right? If you've only got 3 runners, you're going to know who they are. But if you've got 15 in a group, you'll be able to see the hours that they've worked. You'll be able to see if they're happy, if they're doing well, and you'll be able to see where in your schedule that overwork is coming. You know, I think the classic thing is that you maybe save money in your budget by maybe putting out a more inexperienced shooter, a camera person, maybe a researcher with a camera to shoot your footage, because it's a money saver. You don't want to pay for an expensive camera person, but then your editor and your edit producer end up pulling longer hours to pull stuff out of that footage, and you're paying your editor overtime, not paying your edit producer overtime, but you're paying your editor overtime. And so then they start to see where those kind of where it's not making sense, really, where they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot. So that's really useful. We'll also be creating a dashboard for broadcasters, so that they will be able. So broadcasters always say, "Oh, I just don't know what's happening on my commissions. You know, we just don't know what's going on. We don't know that people are working these ridiculous hours, and it's horrifying." So this will allow them to see what their commissions, who's working these long hours on commissions, and in very kind of granular detail. My dog's growling, he thinks it's very important too. Very granular detail as to where the problems are. But I think Rowan, you said this earlier, for us, it's about also seeing where best practice is. You know, it's not about snooping on people or kind of going, "Oh, this is all terrible." It's about showing where people are doing things right. And, you know, and it's great for the broadcasters to be able to see, "Oh, wow, these production companies, they've obviously got something right, because, you know, we can see that their workforce is happy, they're kind of doing sensible hours, and they're, you know," and I think it kind of goes hand in hand. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but by indies having this kind of tool where they can see the direct effect of a tight schedule or a low budget, when they can see the direct effect that has on their workforce, where, you know, they can see that a low budget means that we have to rely on unpaid work from people pulling excessive hours, then they got that evidence to make a case to the broadcasters to say, you know, you need to be giving us better, more realistic schedules and a budget that actually means that we can make the show that you want us to make. So we hope that it's a positive for everybody. So yeah, at the moment it's just for the workers, but in sort of a future a sprint, we'll be able to make it for the indies and the broadcasters so that they can pull this data.
Sounds amazing. Actually, I'm just going to take this opportunity to remind people that are watching that you can leave any questions. We're going to have a little section at the end of this chat where you can ask our panelists any questions. So if you just leave any of your questions in the comments section that's appearing underneath our faces, and we'll come to those in a minute. But actually now I'm going to move on to Andy now. And ask a bit about why Directors UK wanted to get involved with the Time Project.
Yeah, thank you. We've campaigned for many years on, I guess, all of the issues that Michelle touched upon, of which time or lack of time, work excessive hours is a factor in all of the, lack of diversity in the industry, mental health issues, burnout, bullying, harassment, poor hiring practices. Those are all things that Directors UK has campaigned on for many years. And we find that campaigning, it's about trying to change the way people behave at the end of the day. And to change behavior, firstly, you need to get people to understand the human impact of, in this case, excessive working hours. And we've all got horror stories. We've all heard horror stories, and we hear them all the time, and they are sadly very powerful stories. But I think it's very easy for people to dismiss those stories as one-offs or exceptions. But when you've got data, you can't argue with data. Data isn't political. Data is just data. It is what is going on. I think the only time you can argue with data is when you say, well, it's not a representative sample. It's only a few people. I guess that's one of the reasons I'm here tonight, because I really want everyone to get behind this, because this is so powerful. You've seen the demo there, and it's something that started off about working hours. There's so much more sort of rich data that can be collected that can tell us so much about the workforce and different aspects of what they're doing across different genres, across different protected characteristics. I guess as an example for us, differences between people working on dramas and factual shows, self-shooting directors, for example, who are having to not only do a very long day, mostly working by themselves, but then driving 4 hours either side of it, that is, I've been in this job for just under a year. I'm old enough to know that TV isn't as glamorous as perhaps people think it is, but I must admit, I've been shocked to hear some of the stories about the conditions that people are working under. And I really want things to change. I know everyone says that, and there's lots of well-intended people in the industry, but hard data really helps drive that change. So that's why I'm behind it. That's why we're behind it at Directors UK, and we want all of you listening to get behind it and tell everyone else about it, because I think this is really powerful.
And actually, after talking with you, sorry, Bex, I'm just going to jump in. After talking with Andy and the team at Directors UK, this idea of the commute was something that came up. You were something very, very concerned about people's health and safety, after driving. I think we've all been there, where you have shot all day and then you're driving yourself somewhere, and then you have to wrangle the footage in your hotel room or whatever it is. So that's one of the new things we're putting in this sprint, actually, is commuting times, whether you're being paid for your commute and how that affects your working day as well. So it's really great that we've been able to kind of consult and respond in that way. We're really pleased about it.
And Arun, same question to you, really, about Bectu and why they wanted to get involved with the Time Project.
Yeah, I'm a organizing official with Bectu, and most of my day is spent with people calling up and essentially sharing these horror stories that Andy just mentioned. I guess people don't call the union with happy stories very often, but that's sort of the nature of my day-to-day work. And I think it kind of goes back to what Rowan and what Michelle said earlier about having to act collectively and having to break a taboo and talk about pay, right? Because these are deep cultural issues. People are used to or accepting this idea that you have to work these intensely long hours, these 90-hour weeks, and breaking down a culture is really, really difficult to do. I think this is where a union comes in, because something that Bectu has been really great at achieving is an agreed set of rates and conditions in film and TV for lots of the technical trades, right? Like camera people, for sparks, for construction on set. They've been really, really well coordinated, well organized, and we've been out there surveying and being very active and strategic in terms of building their power and creating a new culture for those workers, so that these sort of longer hours are unacceptable, or lower pay is unacceptable. It's a reason why people in production don't really go and pick fights on rates and conditions with any of the sparks. So what it's done is it's created this sort of cultural precedent, and in other parts of the union that's less the case. So with our writers, producers, and directors, with people who work in animation, and in people in new trades like COVID supervisors or intimacy coordinators, these new sorts of jobs that are coming up, that's less of the case. The major impediment, of course, is that employers don't want their workers to talk about their pay, right? They don't want you to talk about your conditions very openly. So typically, a worker will be offered a contract. Most of it you won't read, but there'll be an outline of how much you're offered, and you then need to try and work out, okay, is there a Bectu rate at all for my job role? What did I get in my last job? Does this really compensate for what I did, or measure up? What are my colleagues getting? How do I even know if this is actually normal? How much of the budget is my salary going to take up? None of these things are really clear, and it's all the sorts of calculations that you're sort of left to make yourself. So what I really like about, or what I'm really excited about in terms of the Time Project, is it's a resource that we can now use to try and figure out what pay and hours are, and if they are actually representative, depending on where you are in the union. And so that tool, it's going to bring us this information regularly. And as time goes on, what I'm also really excited about is just the level of nuanced, granular detail that it's going to have, so that it informs the campaigns that we do on workplace fatigue, welfare at work, anti-bullying, mental health campaigns that we have that have always been workplace issues, but I guess have now started to turn into industrial issues that our members are really passionate about and find are really important in their workplace, just as important as the sort of bread and butter union stuff like pay and conditions. And so, yeah, I guess as a union, we evolve with the technology and the tools that are out there. We would typically or historically, ask our members, to send in their payslips so we can analyze them and try and get a bit of a picture, or we would, rock up on site and physically survey our members and get them to fill in forms so that we know what we can actually demand. And so, Bectu's involvement, I think, is really positive, because I think the Time Project's going to be a really excellent and simple way to encourage our members to, report what their employers are offering them, and what their employers are, sort of hoping that they're not willing to talk about.
And I think, Rowan, if I can ask you about, we're talking a lot about the employees here, but how do the indies and the broadcasters figure in the Time Project?
Well, I think Michelle's outlined what they can gain from it, and really it's an industry-wide kind of improvement project. If that doesn't sound too kind of dictatorial, it is for everyone. Certainly for the broadcasters, we want staff to be involved. Often staff don't, or staff are considered to have kind of cushy jobs, perhaps. But we really want to know, about their working hours, about their conditions. Perhaps these staff jobs are the site of best practice, in which case that can be argued for as use for a model, in which case perhaps the broadcasters need to fund the indies slightly better. And, the indies are really, largely stuck between a rock and a hard place. Budgets have gone down in real time. They've been squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. So how can this data help them? Michelle talked about the dashboard. We hope to gather enough data to take to the broadcasters to talk about adequate scheduling, start and scheduling times. So swift starts are really, really punitive, particularly around diversity. And then, around retaining staff as well. You can't, anyone with a caring responsibility often can't start work the next Monday. So, you end up with the same faces doing the same jobs because they're the ones who can do them quickly. So, the benefits, I think, are there for everyone.
And I think it was interesting hearing a bit, and I know Arun knows about this, about the Australian timesheets system. I mean, I suppose is the hope that we go that way, and maybe Arun, you can tell us a bit about that system and how it works.
I can tell you a little bit about it, because it is a bit sort of yes and no in terms of how timesheets work, and if they are always applied in media. Obviously there's a big cultural difference in terms of how much people are expected to work and how they're remunerated at work in Australia. I can speak for Sydney at least, where I was born and raised. But contracts and agreements, for individual workers tend to run into sometimes hundreds of pages, and that's obviously as opposed to the very informal agreements that we sometimes see over here. So whilst it's really tedious, having all your rights and everything else spelt out, it does mean that there are a lot more secure protections. Now, I mean, obviously, this isn't to say that, it's all a bit of a worker's paradise over there. It's, sort of hot and cold, Tim Tams and Tasmanian devils. I just made that idiom up. We don't actually say that. But, a lot of the same issues exist in terms of the contemporary debates that are happening here in terms of, workplace representation, diversity in newsrooms and in media. All those sorts of things still exist. But in terms of actual time that's spent at work, again, it's a controversy that's been a very long time in terms of people's activity at work. So in many cases, your work hours are set out in either a collective agreement or in what's known as an award wage. And those awards are sort of spelt out by the government, which basically says that everyone who works as a clerk in a church or a religious institution is entitled to this pay with these sorts of hours. Anyone who works in a shoe factory is very, very, very detailed. But in collective agreements or in agreements with medium to large size organizations, it's also spelt out in terms of what hours you're expected to work. Now, what's become less and less common is the sort of old school timesheet where you sort of fill in your hours and you have your manager or your superior sign that off. What we do have, though, is buyouts and managers or employers essentially buying out, I know they exist here as well, buying out your sort of right to, X amount of weekend days or overtime and all that sort of stuff. But I think the main difference is that when a buyout occurs in lots of the newsrooms or media publications that I've worked in, it has to be very transparently described to you what exactly is being bought out. So they will say in your contract, you work Monday to Friday, this is how much you're paid, but we're going to give you an extra 15%, which represents the 3 Sundays per quarter that you work, and it represents the 4 days a week that you might spend per fortnight working between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. And so it's very, very detailed in terms of what your buyout actually represents. And it's always up for review and renegotiation in terms of, if it turns out that you're actually working way more Sundays than was anticipated, you can go back and say, this is no longer representative, and these are my timesheets that represent that, or these are my rotas that represent that or prove that. So it then becomes renegotiated. So I think the sort of key difference, of course, or the sort of value in that really is just the transparency, because people don't feel like they're unfairly, worked to the bone or not paid for their efforts.
Now I'm conscious of time, and we've got a lot of questions to ask. So I suppose I might just finish mine a little bit by saying, and maybe asking Andy actually, what your hopes for the Time Project are, both maybe personally and also for Directors UK and the organisations that are supporting it.
Well, I guess firstly, I hope everyone working in TV sees the value in it and gets behind it. Actually, going back to your demo, Michelle, I'm guessing that first time you fill it in, there's quite a lot of data to fill in about yourself, but after you've done that, it's probably quite quick.
Exactly. Exactly. So the registration is it's a page. It's actually not that onerous, and then you can choose to fill in the other stuff later. But yeah, basically day to day, you're filling in when you started work, when you finished work, did you take a break, and then how did you feel, which will be the one, and then it's up to you. You can mess around and just check how you compare. But yeah, so it's a very quick click done.
So it being that easy, I hope that we quickly get to a critical mass of people using it, because once we do, then that is really going to be so powerful. It's going to tell us things we perhaps didn't know before, and probably confirm stuff we've we've known for a long time as well. And when I say us, I don't just mean representatives of directors or the workforce. I mean the broadcasters. I mean the production companies as well, because when you've got all that data, you can then start having those sort of more collaborative conversations, because it is all our problem, and we've got to work together to fix it. And I think this will really help in that. I think going back to hopes, I really do hope that the broadcasters and production companies see the value in this, and they don't just see it as something that is being used against them, because I really don't think that is the intention. But at the same time, I think that the fact that it's being developed by people that come from the workforce, I think that is really, I really like that. And I think it gets you a lot of trust from the start in terms of people wanting to use it in a way that perhaps other sort of data collecting initiatives haven't had that trust. So yeah, I think it's very exciting. It can be really powerful. I think it's going to be probably some months before we start getting data to start using in a meaningful way. But I think it can really help us drive a lot of change in this industry.
So I'm going to move on to some questions now, the first one I've got, and I know I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong, so I do apologise. Teal, who has actually just finished her MBA in television leadership, and it was actually the focus of her dissertation, what we're talking about. So she says she'd like to know, without an industry-wide overhaul in how freelancers are hired and employed, what single companies and even leaders can do to support freelancers, especially when work is precarious, hours are long, lead-up times are short and people are easily replaceable. When time is always short and money is always low, how can single companies do things differently and remain competitive? Who wants to take that one?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? And I think it's I think what we're hoping is that the Time Project will allow people to see where the inefficiencies are in a schedule. So I think, yes, we are pushing for bigger budgets for productions, so that people can be paid fairly. But what we're also hoping is that we'll illuminate where actually cash is being wasted, and actually where if you can schedule and tweak things differently, that actually you can be much more much more efficient in the way that you run your production. Yes, I think that's. Rowan, do you want to comment on anything of that?
No, I think that's the main benefit of the project and the data that we'll gather. I mean, we know anecdotally that money is wasted, and the data should show that, as long as everyone uses it. So.
I mean, I think that companies and broadcasters, everybody, especially over the last year, has been talking about how important it is to increase diversity in the workforce, how awful it is that we've got this mental health crisis. There's a lot of talk about it, but actually, if they want things to change, and if they're serious about wanting things to change, then they do need to take action, and they do need to look at their budgets and look at their schedules, and because I think that is the heart of the problem.
Although we just seeing discussions that are happening on the Hub at the moment about this, Annette Gordon points out that obviously the burden is very much being laid on the smaller companies, where maybe it's the bigger broadcasters that have the power to make this change. So what happens, are we penalising smaller companies in getting all of this data? What's your thoughts on how smaller companies can cope with this kind of information?
Well, we hope that we've designed the app so it gathers information to present an argument for budget improvements. That's been the way in which we've tried to develop it. We understand, of course, that it's the smaller companies that are the most squeezed, and are having the hardest time and have the narrowest margins. So they're the ones if anything, that need this information the most, because we hope it will kind of engender a sense of collectivity, which has, really emerged since COVID hit and the and production collapsed over a year ago. That, from that, and this is perhaps a little naive and optimistic, so there will be some generosity from the bigger companies in leading the way, because they are the ones with perhaps a little more cushioning. And we do know, for example, that some bigger companies already use a timesheet system. And we're hoping that the Time Project will augment what they already have, which will present a different kind of argument, as we try to mitigate precarity for all of the industry.
And somebody here also asks, is disability included in the identifying factors in the app?
Yes. Yes, so you're able to say whether you are disabled, and then also the type of disability. So that'll be interesting to see how that affects, because it may be that working excessive hours means that you are excluding great disabled talent.
And the question here from Nadia Mardi, again, sorry if I'm saying your name incorrectly. Can you only analyse data if 15 people are doing the same job for the same company?
No, within specific companies, we've made it so no one can be identified, because, obviously we don't want anyone, we know there are sites of bad practice, and we don't want anyone within that specific company to be identified if they're reporting bad practice. There are mechanisms built into it that where we have a kind of critical mass, so people can't be anonymized in the comparative data either. So it just makes sure that all contributions are anonymized at every level. Does that answer your question?
I think it's like, so when you're comparing, so for example, if I'm an indie owner and I'm looking at my dashboard at my workforce, I'll be able to see that the craft and tech roles are working this many more hours more than development, for example. But if you're a small company, you won't be able to see by job role, because there might only be one person who's in your development department, or only one person in your as a runner, for example. So you'll only be able to see the data that is at a certain mass to be anonymized. So you would be able to see, probably by department, maybe if you're a company that runs scripted and unscripted productions, you'll be able to compare between genres. If you're a massive mega indie, then sure, you'll be able to see, if your runners, how your runners are doing or whatever.
I think it's interesting as well that obviously the pandemic actually forced a lot of maybe short-term change, in that, suddenly working practice had to change anyway, just because we weren't allowed to go into the office and we weren't, we had to socially distance. But I think it's very key to now, as we hopefully move out of lockdown, and as everything eases and hopefully life goes back to a bit more normality again, is, how do we ensure that this change will stick? And indeed, how will you actually use the Time Project to make change? I mean, will it be government policy that forces the industry to treat people and their working hours in a more humane way?
Rowan, do you want me to do it, or maybe? I mean, this might be a case to bring in Arun at this point. Actually, this is one of the reasons we're working very closely with Vectu to make change, because and I think when we have a suitable mass of data, that's when we work very closely with the union, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think government legislated change is certainly a mechanism. It's certainly a tool that we can use or potentially campaign for if we reach enough critical mass, have enough data, have enough people feeling like this is especially important for our industry. As I sort of mentioned before, it's certainly the case in Australia that almost every job is legislated in terms of the wages that they command and the times that you're expected to work. my sort of personal opinion is that I think, a government should legislate these things and set standard minimums across every different type of industry, which then becomes an obligation, obviously, for production companies to stick to those norms. That said, we don't have legislated rates or conditions for some of the tech trades that we have in our industry. We've essentially established those norms by amassing enough data, telling people that this is how much your job is worth, and this is how strongly these workers particularly feel about the amount of time that they spend on set and the type of conditions that they should be entitled to. But ultimately, the ultimate power for some of those other trades that we know where it's worked is in their labor. We know that if they were to leave, the whole show stops, right? So that's, again, another mechanism, I suppose. But these are things that we can actually bring with people power or mass power or campaign power as well.
I don't think. So I was just going to add one more thing to that.
Yeah,
going back to the budget's point, I don't think any of us are naive enough to think that this is going to suddenly create more money in the industry, or even government involvement will create more money. But I think what it should illustrate is that for different types of program or production, I think it will help work out, well, is this a realistic budget or not? And if you can't make this type of program without putting people's lives at risk or creating all sorts of mental health issues, then you need to think about how you budget and whether you make those types of programs. I don't say that to put people out of work, but I think we have to think about that really carefully.
Absolutely. Go on, Bex.
I slightly left the chat there unintentionally, but thanks for that. And obviously we're now coming up to sort of the end of our little discussion. So I suppose what I'd like to ask the SMTJ team really is what are your long-term ambitions for the Time Project?
Rowan, do you want to go first?
I think it can, as I said, be an argument to mitigate precarity. I think it can help retain staff. I think it can reveal attitudinal barriers. What we haven't talked about tonight is a further facility we have further down the line to gather qualitative data around the quantitative data that will that's coming at the moment. So these attitudinal barriers will illuminate the kind of the lived experience of what the data demonstrates to us. And I think it's, it sounds quite grandiose, but we are living, in a time of great cultural transition anyway. And I hope it gives us a chance to kind of reconceive the idea of what a TV career should look like. We have a very masculinized model at the moment, and that is where the culture of overwork resides most strongly. So if we move to a model that values people and their lives slightly more, then, I think we'll have done a very good job.
And Andy and Arun, do you have anything that you'd like to say before we wrap up our discussion tonight?
I guess I just want to add that I think whilst, the Time Project has been developed by, the Share My Telejob group, and has sort of also sprung out of people working in the unscripted TV part of the industry. My sincere hope for the project is that there is going to be no barrier for any worker in any part of the industry in film or TV to use that tool to better inform, our campaigns. Well,
I think we may have lost Michelle, but I think what we'll do now is wrap up, as we're just past the end of the hour now, which just leaves me to say thank you so much for all of our lovely panelists tonight coming to talk to us on the TM Hub, Obviously, we are avid supporters and always have been of SMTJ, and obviously now the Time Project as well. So we're really happy to have been able to give a voice to everything to do with the Time Project tonight. Yeah, we wish it every success. We are still, we will keep this recording live on the Hub post if people wanted to rewatch anything, or if they did indeed want to still leave questions, or if questions have are unanswered. I know that the SMTJ team would be happy to get back to you guys and to answer anything that hasn't been able to be covered in tonight's session. So really, that just all that remains for me to say is thank you very much, and we wish you every success with the Time Project.
Thank you very much for having us.
Lovely. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.